I'm Kaylee Bowling from Jackson County REMC in Brownstown, Indiana. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is supported by One Source Restoration, who shares in the commitment to the safety, comfort, and convenience of NRECA's members. OSR was extensively involved in the recent recovery of cooperatives in the devastating wake of Hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. This fall, two back-to-back major hurricanes, Helene and Milton, made landfall on the west coast of Florida. Helene hit the Big Bend area on September 26th as a Category 3 storm and lumbered north for several days, causing billions of dollars in wind and flooding damage and taking more than 200 lives before dissipating. Milton hit the Tampa Bay area on October 9, also as a Category 3, and marched directly across the state, setting off a spate of tornadoes and causing widespread flooding across Florida before moving out to sea. Lauren's Electric Cooperative is located in the heavily forested and hilly territory of northwest South Carolina, near Greenville. Helene inflicted unprecedented damage on their system, with thousands of fallen trees and limbs taking out power for nearly their entire membership. To hear about the damage and the recovery, we'll talk to CEO Matt Stanley. Later, we'll hear from David Lambert, the CEO of Withlacoochee River Electric Cooperative in Central Florida. Withlacoochee took direct hits from both Helene and Milton and suffered historic flooding and wind damage. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you having me on today.
All right, why don't you start us off with a rundown of the total damage to your distribution system from Helene, from outage numbers, broken poles, transmission, all that.
Okay. When the hurricane came through and it kind of settled down, we had about 98% of our total system out. We have roughly 64,000 meters or so, and like I said, 98% of those were out. We had lost transmission service to about 30 of 31 substations. We actually have 32 substations, but one of those really isn't energized right now, not carrying any load. So really, it was about 30 out of 31. And with that, we had 124 of our 126 distribution circuits that did not have any power. So we were kind of sitting in the dark at that point. When it all settled down, we're looking at probably over 700 broken poles, probably 300 plus damaged transformers, a little over 400 broken cross arms. So just quite a bit of, damage, certainly something we've never seen before. The thing that was different about this storm was typically when we have a windstorm, we'll have some tree damage, but typically it's tops of trees breaking out. In this case, we had entire trees that were falling, giant root balls that we saw just laid down everywhere. So it was laying down, across the roadways. It was laying down certainly into people's homes and businesses. The tree damage that we experienced this time was something like we've never seen before. We were fortunate. The folks up in North Carolina and what they're dealing with is completely different. And our hearts and prayers are certainly with them. But from what we saw on our side it was the wind damage and the tree damage, not as much water damage that they certainly experienced to north of us.
Now, how about your employees? Did they come out okay? Did some of them lose homes or have extensive damage?
We did have several of our employees that had pretty excessive damage to their homes. But for the most part, our employees came out okay with that. We certainly had a lot of them have trees down around their homes, and they were blocked from even getting into work that morning as that was going on, not only just at their residences, much less as far as the roadways to get into work, but just trees across their driveways and such. But overall, our employees are doing pretty well. They came out of that pretty good. So we were fortunate that we didn't have any bad injuries or loss of life.
And so while you were watching the radar and the hurricane reports of this storm developing in the Gulf, and they were sort of pointing directly at your region, what were you thinking? What were some of the meetings you were having with your team and maybe with the statewide to talk about, okay, well, how do we prepare for this?
Sure. We were certainly keeping an eye on it from the early part of the week. As we got into Tuesday or Wednesday, we really started to keep a much closer eye on that because we had a better feel of kind of what we thought we might be expecting. But it seemed like every day that forecast just got a little worse and a little worse and a little worse. And by the time we got to Thursday, we knew we were in for probably a pretty good storm. But like I said earlier, we certainly weren't expecting anything like this. I think part of our issue and part of what caused the tree damage was we received about 12 inches of rain or so in about a day and a half. So that saturated the ground. And then we got all those winds. I mean, we were seeing gusts of 70, 75 mile an hour winds here in the upstate of South Carolina. And we were expecting those to be in the 40, 45 mile an hour range.
And just sort of to inform our listeners, is there much you can do to prepare for a windstorm like that, especially when you know the ground's going to be saturated?
It's really hard to prepare for that. We were certainly trying to prepare. We were ordering materials and trying to get some lodging secured and stuff like that. But to prepare for the wind damage, that's really difficult to do.
Walk us through that day that it sort of started to move into your territory. Where were you? Were you at the co-op office? Were you at home? Were you getting updates on how the storm was impacting your territory?
The storm started rolling in early on the 27th. So the 26th, we started to hold some crews here. We knew we were going to have some outages, and so we started preparing for that, really from a crew standpoint, and released some early the day of the 26th so that they could come back and be on site at the co-op on the 27th. And then really, this thing started to unfold. In the early morning hours, we were probably at a few thousand members that were out. By about 5 a.m., we had about 5,000 members out. And then by the time we got to 8 a.m., we were sitting at over almost 64,000 members without power. So, kind of watching that thing unfold, it just seemed, I'd never seen anything like it. And I've been the CEO at the co-op now for about 10 months. So I'm new in the CEO role, but I've been at the co-op for 25 years. And as this thing rolled out, it was just chunks of members that were going out when we got into those 6, 7, 8 o'clock hours. It went from 5,000 to 63, 64,000 in what seemed like just the snap of a finger.
Wow. So, okay, walk us through a little bit of the restoration. The storms rolled through. You have a pretty good idea that your system is nearly 100% down. Where do you start and how did it progress from there? How many days overall, things like that?
It was kind of strange because I guess by about noontime, it had cleared up. It was still a little overcast. Still had some decent winds, but it was 25, 30, 35 mile an hour winds. But we were able at that point to get out and start assessing what we had. So we started sending our employees out at that point in time. And it just seemed like everyone that we had out there assessing the damage and doing the bird dogging for us, there's trees everywhere. And they couldn't get where our lines were even at because they were having to drive around the roadways that were blocked and try and find different ways into just where our power lines were. So that was certainly a challenge to just even get the assessment done. And it took us, I would say, typically we would have that assessment done fairly quickly, but it took us days just to get that assessment done just because we couldn't get to where we needed to get to. Again, that was just because of all the tree damage we had. But the other thing that happened that really caused us a problem was we lost power to our headquarters building. With that, internet service was down, phone service was down, cellular service was spotty at best. So we were kind of sitting there blind. And we were having a hard time because of that. We couldn't use our AMI system like we normally would to ping meters and see if it's really out or if it was just kind of the way it was reporting in our OMS system. So it was a challenge early on just to really get a feel for that. But I think by about Saturday, so this happened on a Friday morning, but by about Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening at the latest, we really had a feel. This wasn't going to be an outage that was going to be 1 or 2 days. This was going to be an outage that was 2 to 3 weeks. And by the time it was all said and done, we were right at 2 weeks before we got the last member restored.
So while you're doing this restoration, one thing that sort of strikes me is all of these, and this is not just restoration, this is a rebuild. Do you have this kind of infrastructure or this kind of material on hand, or did you have any trouble getting poles, wires, transformers?
I would say we certainly don't have that type of material on hand. The material became a very big challenge for us, and a big shout out goes to all of our suppliers on being able to help us to manage through that. You think early on, you may have a couple of hundred poles broke. It may be something you can handle and manage through that. But as that, like each day that built, by the time, like I said, we're over 700 broken poles now. So the first probably week getting poles in every day was certainly very important to us because we were replacing so many. And then after that, it kind of shifted into transformers becoming a problem for us and cross arms. So it seemed like every day we were fighting a new material battle, even sleeves, just to sleeve the wire together, those became an issue. So it seemed like every day we were fighting a different material battle. We were fortunate enough to have very good relationships with our suppliers, and they came through for us. And they were fighting it on their end because it wasn't just one co-op in the state. There was all of the state was really fighting this. For South Carolina, at least half of the co-ops were in a pretty bad spot and not dealing with a 1 or 2 day outage. They were dealing with week-long outage or better.
You mentioned that you were reaching out to mutual assistance crews to stage and be ready. Do you have a sense of what would the total number of visiting crews was when all was said and done?
Yeah, so I think we had over 680 people on our line. We ramped that up. That was certainly a challenge for us because we didn't know what we had. It seemed like it took us several days to kind of figure that out. And so we were ramping up every day there for a week to get to that 680 number. But just trying to secure those crews was a challenge for us too, because like I said, the whole region got impacted. So the people that we would probably pull from North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, they were all impacted as well. So we started having to reach out to certainly different areas of the country. So we had line workers from over 17 states here on our system, from as far up north as New Jersey, New York, Minnesota, from everybody down below that as well that came south. So we had Kentucky groups, Ohio groups, Pennsylvania, a little bit of everything across this part of the country.
So one of the things I noticed when I was doing some research for this is that your social media feeds during that time were very active. Even though you probably didn't have great connectivity, you were constantly keeping your members up to date. How did you guys manage that? And I assume that that was one of your priorities, because it really does look like you put a lot of resources into it. How did that go, and how did it pay off in the goodwill of your members?
I think that was a very important piece for us, because we didn't have power at the co-op. Our members didn't have power at their home. So they weren't jumping on their computers and doing that. Everything was done through their phone, and that's if they could even get cellular service. The social media piece became very important for us, because we were able to post that information, and we were trying to do that 2 or 3 times a day, just general updates on kind of where we were at in the power restoration. I think we did a very good job of getting information and video, especially the videos. I think the videos put it into a little different perspective for our members, because they could see what our guys were seeing. And so we had a group of employees here that were kind of dealing with the social media, but Lori Reiser, I'd like to give her a good shout out as well, because she was really kind of the one spearheading that, doing most of the work there. And she really did an amazing job for us on keeping our members updated throughout the storm.
Yeah, it was a masterclass, and it had to deal with a really bad situation and keeping your members updated. Talk a little bit about the resilience of not only your employees, but your members throughout this. One thing I noticed in looking at the social media feed is that 99% of the comments were all positive about the work you were doing, very little grousing about it. Everybody sort of understood the weight of this. How are the employees doing? How has the membership doing? What are you hearing on that front?
I appreciate you bringing that up, because as I talked about our employees, the way the employee base came together, it really wasn't even questions asked or anything like that. Everybody knew what we were facing. And true to what I think you would expect from most co-ops, everybody just jumped in and pitched in and did whatever they needed to do to get us through the storm. What was a little different for us was typically we're kind of on the helping end of the communities when things happen. But in this case, we really had an outpouring of support from our communities wanting to help us. Even this morning, I got letters from an elementary school that were thanking our linemen. I got something from a vendor that gave us gift certificates to their business. We don't typically experience that in a normal outage, but our membership and our communities really understood what we were facing and what we were going through. And I think the reason they knew that, though, is they could see the damage. I mean, this wasn't damage that was just in one part of our service territory. It was all across our entire service territory, and everybody could see it. So I can't say enough about the outpouring of support that we got from the community and the work that our employees put in to help get this behind us, at least the restoration piece behind us.
So any lessons learned that you can impart to other co-op CEOs, anything either operationally or preparation-wise, anything you can sort of put out there?
Sure. First of all, I'd say there's a lot of lessons learned. If you go through a storm like this and don't have any lessons learned, then you probably got your head in the sand somewhere. But I think the communication piece, especially early on when we lost our phones, when we lost the internet, when we lost cellular, the way to communicate that way, our old radio system came in pretty handy. And I think we've got to do some things to beef that up just a little bit to make sure that if we ever have to face something like this again, we rely so much on our phones today, and so much of that communication is done that way. But in this case, the phones weren't working. So the radio system certainly was something that was very, very key for us. And just the pre-planning, we're kind of set up to handle a 2, 3, 4-day outage. We weren't prepared to go through a 14, 15-day outage. That was just different for us. So I think trying to find alternate sites for material drops and staging areas, one of the things that became a challenge for us and anybody, when you get that many people on your system, you can't just bring them all into the yard that you've got at your headquarters. You've got to spread that out, and you've got to divide that amongst different places. So we've got an operations center up the northern part of our system, but we found one kind of centrally that we used as a staging area, and that allowed us to feed crews and be able to meet with them in the morning, because you just can't get that many people rolling through your yard. So that was certainly big, having those different staging areas. And I think one of the things that we learned in that is you better have a good assessment tool as well. We had some help on getting that assessment done. So that is certainly something we're going to be looking at and looking to beef up a little bit as we move forward. And, there's a whole host of other things that I could run through. I could spend all day doing that.
You and your team have been through hell, and it sounds like you've come through pretty well at the end. And I really appreciate you sharing your insights and sharing your experience. So thanks so much for coming on, Matt.
Absolutely. I thank you. And again, appreciate you having me on.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll hear from Withlacoochee River Electric Cooperative CEO David Lambert.
Along those lines is made possible by OSR, whose mission is a safe and speedy recovery after a storm. The OSR difference is evident in their safety oversight, year-round crew observations, and exceptional personnel experience. During recent storms, OSR had over 1,800 resources supporting electric cooperatives in Florida and South Carolina, including damage assessors, line crews, and tree trimming crews. Plan and prepare for the next storm by exploring OSR's additional services at osr.energy.
I'm Brandy Ball from Indian Electric Cooperative in Cleveland, Oklahoma. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Withlacoochee River Electric Cooperative was heavily impacted by both Helene and Milton, suffering mainly coastal flooding from the first storm and historic wind and water damage throughout their territory from the second. CEO David Lambert is here to talk about their preparation, the impact, and the recovery from these events. David, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Withlacoochee took either a direct or near direct hit from both of these storms. Talk about the damage that you sustained from Helene, and then we'll get into Milton after that.
You know, Helene was a major coastal flooding event for us. While we had some inland issues with trees falling and things like that, we're a coastal co op. We serve 3 counties along Florida's Gulf Coast, and most of our members along the west side of US 19 received 4 to 12 foot of water in their homes. So this was significant. We serve over 10,000 accounts on the coast. And so all of those accounts received major flood damage. So not only did we have an issue with flooding, we had an issue of thousands upon thousands of people that could not go back to their home that really needed to go back to their home.
I guess roughly a week later, Milton comes along, and that seemed to be more of a direct hit on the interior of your system. Talk a little bit about the damage that did to the infrastructure.
So Milton came just south of us, but the eye wall came over part of our service territory in Polk, the northern eye wall in Polk and Pasco counties, and we received significant wind. Irma had been our worst storm before Milton, and when Milton came, it was the worst storm in the history of the cooperative. That evening, we were able to start restoring some power before the winds got too high as things went out. But as we're going through the storm and we're seeing circuits open, we have over 250 distribution circuits. The cooperative's quite large co-op. And when Milton finally passed, we had approximately 100 distribution circuits out and had sustained some type of damage. And then on top of that, during the storm, because we had so much flooding and we sustained damage to our buildings, our server rooms and things flooded. So we lost all communications with our substations. And that was significant because we knew when we lost communication with our substations, we had about 140,000 members, accounts without power. When we lost communications and the storm lasted another about 6 to 7 hours, when we finally got the storm passed, we actually had to cut our way out of our corporate office. We couldn't get in or out. There were so many large oak trees down. And then we had to start assessing the damage to get communications back to our substations. And we had to do that the old fashioned way. We started restoring power just by going to the circuit, starting riding out our main lines and starting assessing. But by the time it was all said and done, we had close to 180,000 members who had been without power. So it was significant.
We were all watching Milton develop rapidly in the Gulf. As you were watching that, what are some of the preparations you're making? What are the meetings you're having? Who are you talking to about how to harden your system as much as you can before this thing hits?
So I was on my way to the regional meetings within our ECA in Columbia, and we got to St. Augustine, and my wife and I were looking at each other, and a 6-inch to 8-inch rain event had turned into a Category 1 hurricane. And we stopped and turned right back around, and then it was all hands on deck. Although Milton didn't hit until Wednesday, we never in the history of the co-op, we brought in over 1,000 line workers and tree trimmers within a 4-day period and got those procured. We had to get rooms, put 2 base camps up. We had never had a base camp before in the history of the co-op. So it was all new, and we knew we were going to get some major damage. So we started preparing. We started moving all of our critical equipment, all of our transformers and things like that inland and in spaces that we knew they couldn't get hurt. And then we did something, the co op, we had just finished a hurricane from Helene a week prior to. So we made the decision to shut the co op down and let our employees go home for about a day and a half, 2 days, and rest because we knew it was going to be a fight. We had never ever done that before for a storm. We didn't do that for COVID. While we closed our offices, everybody still worked every day. So we said, everybody's tired in this Florida heat. We're in rapid growth, anyways. The co op's going to add about 13,000 new accounts this year. So I made the decision as the general manager, we're going to shut the co op down for safety reasons and allow our people to get some rest. And then everybody was to report as soon as the storm passed, and they were safe to do so. When the storm passed 3:30 Thursday morning, we were already getting calls from the sheriff's department on power lines and things like that blocking the road, and we went at it. And we started getting things open so we could get in services to our members. We had to do some historic things that we had never done at Withlacoochee.
Do you have a sense of what the total damage was after it sort of moved on? How many poles down? How many substations out?
Yeah, so we had multiple substations out. I think we had about 27 stations that were without power, but we have 250 plus distribution circuits. When we ended, 100 of those distribution circuits were without power. Some of those distribution circuits can have 1,500 people on them, or they can have 7,000 people on them. So we knew the damage was significant, and Florida had received so much rain with just the wind from Milton, and because of the rain from Helene, we knew that we were going to have extensive tree damage. And we did. I think by the time it's all said and done, we'll have had over 1,000 some poles down. And we're still doing the tally on that. We had truck fuel in Florida. You talk about historic things and you happen to do things that you had never done before. Well, they shut the port of Tampa down and fuel couldn't come into Florida. We trucked fuel from Texas and Pennsylvania, 3 tanker trucks a day just to keep our operations going for 4 days until they could get the ports open and get fuel rolling back into the co op. That's significant. And during the storm, what we do too is we prepare for major damage. We have diesel generators at almost all of our hospital and critical locations, well fields, wastewater treatment facilities. So during that time, we lost power to multiple hospitals. And so they were running off of our generators, and we had to keep those fueled through the entire process for days until we could get those circuits, a couple of days till we could get those circuits back up and running. And of course, those types of things are a priority for us when we do it. And we had to do things that we'd never done before, but we did them. We did them effectively. And we were considered fully restored by state standards in 70 hours. So within 70 hours, we had restored 95% of our system. And that's a testament to the men and women at the co op and our board. If you take a look at Milton, when we started making our first calls to bring in people to help us, everybody was in Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. There were no contractors to be had. We had 10 contracts with contractors, and we got to number 7 before anyone said yes. We'll send somebody, and that was limited. And then, of course, as the days went on and they got freed up in Georgia and Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina, we were able to start getting some crews in. But Withlacoochee has over 230 linemen. We brought in about 700 contract linemen and tree trimmers, so a little over 1,200 total from each group. And that's significant for us, but for the size and scope of the worst storm we had, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And that's just a testament to what we've been doing to strengthen the system. All the old copper lines we've been taking out, all of, like I said, shorter spans, focusing on hardening steel poles, ductile iron poles, concrete poles that will withstand larger wind loading. It's a big deal.
I know your co-op particularly is very good about taking care of the less fortunate members in your community. Have there been projects and things that you've done in the wake of Milton for some of these disadvantaged areas that you serve that's sort of above and beyond what you would normally do?
Sure, we donated all the food left over from our base camps, but more importantly, out at the Withlacoochee area, the Boys and Girls Club set up a feeding area. We worked with the county to help them get comfort stations set up so people could get in and have places to shower, do their laundry, things like that. We also donated to charities like the United Way to help with that area. We have a partnership with the Boy Scouts, and we really support scouting, and we had a base camp set up there, and the scouts went out in the community to help people in that area. And we're still helping through our Operation Roundup program, supporting those folks in need. It's been a pretty good, Withlacoochee is a big part of the fabric of our community. And I'll give you a specific example. Tampa Electric, our investor owned utility, serves the city of Dade City, and they took a direct hit. And we reached out to their CEO, Archie Collins, and I said, Archie, I know you guys are going to have a lot on your hands. If there's any way we can help you restore power in the city of Dade City or any other areas, please let me know. We were fully restored then, and we were getting a lot of calls from our elected officials and things like that who said, can you please help? And we said, of course we can. And unprecedented working together with Tampa Electric. We didn't have a memorandum of understanding in place. We didn't have anything like that, which most people would look at and say, we're till the attorneys vet out this agreement. People in our community, even though we didn't serve it, were hurting and they needed the co-op's help. And I'm sure Tampa Electric would have helped us as well. They're a good company. And we worked hand in hand to restore the city of Dade City with them. So the partnerships that you create, it's not about pride, it's about doing the right thing for the communities that we serve, which co-ops are all about. And I'm proud to be able to lead this one through the worst storm in its history.
Anything you can sort of point to as a lesson learned from this particular storm for other CEOs or you to make changes at your co-op? Anything that sort of sticks out?
I would say be able to change on a dime. We started off with what was supposed to be a 6 to 8 inch rainmaker, which is a normal day in Florida in the summer. That can happen to us. We can receive 70-mile-an-hour tropical force winds in an afternoon. But it went from that to a category 4 or 5 hurricane within a few days. And we went in and out of a direct hit zone. And we learned have more contracts in place when you can't get it someplace else. Fuel, for an example, look to other areas and look to see what you can do to make things better within your community and expect the unexpected. And we got hit with the unexpected. We weren't expecting it, but teamwork, communication, and collaboration on all aspects of what we did really made this hurricane a lot more manageable. The co-op certainly received a lot of goodwill, not only from our members, but elected officials, local, state, and national. And be prepared. Go over that plan. Never think it's not going to happen to you. While this was the worst storm that we've ever had in the co-op's history, we certainly know that it could happen to us again next year. So we're going to be working to strengthen that plan and make the investment on the system. And I think one of the things that we really did, we have taken communications to a different level with our members. They engage with us 24/7, not just during a hurricane. You want them to try to engage with you during normal times. So when it's tough times like that, they understand your message and what you're trying to do. And I think it was really helpful and really effective for us. It lowered the temperature, so to speak, because people seen us out doing what we needed to do to get their power restored. They seen that we brought in the appropriate resources to help, that there was going to be a tomorrow, the sun was going to come up and shine, and that somebody was going to get their power on and that we cared about them. And I think that went a long way.
Well, you got through this one, David, and hopefully it's the last one of 2024. I appreciate you coming on and telling us how it went. Thanks so much for being a guest.
You're welcome. Talk to you later. See you, Scott.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, OSR. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us on electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Joe Miller from the Minnesota Statewide Association in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.